We're going to talk a little bit about marijuana, and then we are definitely going to have time to talk about our postcards with you guys and get your feedback on those. But we're talking about marijuana today because, Connecticut New York just legalized recreational marijuana, just making it commercially available. Connecticut may do that this year, so we think everyone should know what we're talking about when we talk about marijuana today, the new marijuana. And we're going to start with a little video from, hang on, I'm going to pause them because I realize I have to turn on my sound, right? This is our Surgeon General, and I want you to hear his quick video.
I hear from folks every day with your health questions. In this video, I'm going to tackle some top questions about marijuana. I'm Surgeon General Jerome Adams, and the doctor is in. Wow, if I had a nickel for every time I got this question. Lots of baby boomers used marijuana, and they seem fine. Why the concern now? Well, the marijuana of today is fundamentally different than in decades past, or even just a few years ago. It's significantly more potent, and it can be further concentrated for use, a combination that can harm the developing brain. This is a really important question. What's the difference between THC and CBD? Well, both are components of cannabis. THC is the component responsible for euphoria and intoxication, getting high, and addiction. Pure CBD or cannabidiol is not intoxicating and has not been shown to lead to addiction. It's important to note that levels of THC found in marijuana have significantly increased over the last few decades. The THC concentration has increased threefold between 1995 and 2014. And as THC increases, so does the risk for addiction. As a parent, here's a question I can appreciate. How should parents and teachers talk to young people about marijuana? Well, we know the best way to address substance use in our children is to prevent it. So be frank with your children about the dangers of marijuana and emphasize how protecting their brains from harm is the best way to ensure a healthy future. If you have more questions about marijuana, I encourage you to go to surgeongeneral.gov and search marijuana.
I have to find my slideshow again. Okay. Can you guys hear me again? All right, somebody let me know if you cannot hear me. So, thanks. You just heard the Surgeon General talk about how marijuana today is really different. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those differences, why it isn't safe for the teen brain, for teenagers and younger people whose brains are developing, some myths, and a little bit about perception of harm. And I'll send the slideshow out to you afterwards, and it has a bunch of extra slides at the end with references to the research that's out there. So if you want to really geek out, there's a lot out there. So first of all, depending, how old you are and how involved in this field you are, you may think that marijuana looks like the picture on the bottom of the screen, but today's marijuana, as often as not, looks like the picture on the top of the screen. So when we say that today's marijuana is, like not your father's marijuana, it is not. These things up here are produced through chemical processes, and we will look at that in a sec. The Surgeon General talked a little bit about CBD versus THC, and that's because, and I want you to understand that because of the next graph in a minute, but these are just two of about 600 ingredients that are contained in the cannabis plant. CBD we see everywhere now, right? Like you can get CBD treats for your dogs. People think it, relaxes and de-stresses. The research on that is really out. Some people feel that they have a sort of wellness impact from it and some don't. But one thing that you should know about CBD is it is not regulated by the FDA in any way. So, buyer beware. I've seen some research where they go and take stuff off shelves to see what it really is. Some CBD products do contain THC, even though they're not legally allowed to. And some CBD products that are for sale don't actually contain CBD because, again, it's not regulated. THC is the thing that gets you high. And so that's the thing to be aware of in the next few slides. So this graph shows you how much stronger marijuana is now than it used to be. You have two lines here. The blue increasing line is showing you the average percent of THC in the marijuana plant, how it's changed over time from 1995 to this graph goes to 2018. So as you can see, it's been bred, because it's an industry, it's been bred to be constantly more full of the active drug that makes you high. The green line that mostly goes down is the CBD content of the plant. Now this graph starts in 1995. If it went back to the 70s when the plant was just kind of the plant, the average amount of THC in the marijuana plant was 1%. Then by the 90s, it was 4%, mid 90s, it was 4%. By 2014, it was 12%. So that was like, it tripled and it tripled again. This chart went to 2018 where it was 16%. It's now closer to about 25% on average nationally, the percent of THC in the plant. So that already means that, anyone who maybe used pot in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you were using a different product. In addition, here are these pictures that we saw in that first slide or that earlier slide. Today, a lot of people are using marijuana in the form of extracts or condensates. So these are just really concentrated THC. This is where you use chemical processes to sort of eliminate all the plant part and just stick with the THC, get the drug, get it as pure as possible. This report, and I think it was 2018, said that the concentrated forms could be up to 76% THC, but I have read stuff more recently that says people are finding THC products on the market that are like 80, 90% THC, so virtually pure drug. And what's important to know is these are the things, if people are like, if you find out your kid was vaping marijuana or dabbing it, that's what they're using, right? You're not using like the plant. So the most recent data from the National Monitoring the Future study was released in December, and it looked like about slightly more than half of high school seniors who were using marijuana in the last 2 years were using it in one of these concentrated forms. So again, very, very potent drug. And so why that matters is that their brains are still developing and what we know now about brain development. So first, you have to know that the human brain is still maturing until you're about 25, 26. And it matures from back to front. So here's a picture of the brain, and you can see the different areas that it's highlighting. It's highlighting the parts of the brain where there are these yellow dots on the screen. Here's my cursor, if you can see it. And these are the areas that are affected by THC. So it's a lot of different things, your coordination, your memory. I mean, we can think of people who are impaired from marijuana or something else, and like they look more uncoordinated. Their memory is shot, on a short-term basis, right? But also just look at the amount of yellow on the whole prefrontal part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that's developing when you're a teen, and it's all your executive function and your judgment. So all those things that we kind of laugh about teens as like not, we know that's still not fully there. That is the part that the THC is really affecting at a really dangerous point in its development. So I have another video. This one's like a 1-minute PSA from the federal government.
The human brain. It takes years to build one right. Adding memories to knowledge to experience. The result is who you are and what you know. But you can also undo, unscrew, and forget. Using marijuana is like that. Marijuana can erase IQ points. It can delete memories and short-circuit the brain's ability to concentrate. It takes years to build a brain. It might be worth a little time to learn more about marijuana and its risks. Go to samhsa.gov/marijuana and use your brain. It's the only one you'll ever have.
So I just lost my slideshow. I wonder if I just closed my slideshow. So that video, is probably one of those things that, the government makes to show kids. And I don't know if kids are going to believe it or be impressed by it. But a couple of the slides I have next are sort of going to emphasize some of those same points that were made. So here again is the Surgeon General commenting in 2019, coming out with a specific warning statement about marijuana use in adolescents and highlighting the fact that the data now shows that marijuana use during adolescence is associated with actual sort of permanent changes in different areas of the brain that we just highlighted. In addition, the earlier someone starts using marijuana, the more likely they are to develop an addiction, not only to marijuana, but to other drugs later. A piece of research that we think parents would probably want to know and may not know is that marijuana has been shown to affect the IQ permanently. So teens who use a few times a week can have an IQ drop of 6 to 8 IQ points. And that same study, which was done in New Zealand, it's pretty well reported, found that people who started using marijuana in their late 20s did not have that effect. So the reality is it's really about the time, the sensitive period in brain development. In addition, I think the video's already highlighted that marijuana is addictive. I want to just show you this graph, which shows different drugs along the bottom. And then the y-axis is the percent of users of each drug who become addicted. So the red bars in the middle are marijuana. And I know when I was in high school, which was the 80s, they really led us to believe that marijuana was a drug that was not addictive. But what we now know is that 1 out of every 10 people who uses marijuana does become addicted. But what the middle red bar is showing you is that 1 out of 6 teenagers who uses marijuana becomes addicted. And if you notice, that bar is also higher than the percent of teens than the percent of people who use alcohol and become addicted. So it really has a very strong impact on the teen brain. Those are just some statistics to highlight that the more potent the marijuana you're using, the more likely you are to develop dependence. And then this is a really super epidemiological geeky slide that's really just showing you another sort of scary fact, which is that the increase you're seeing is basically showing you the probability that you will develop a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, and the fact that your likelihood of developing it increases the more frequently you use THC and the more strong the THC is. I also want to point out that in this study, which was published in The Lancet a year and a half ago, they were defining strong THC as greater than 10%. So I just want to remind you that when kids are using these concentrates, and young adults in particular using them, it could be 80% THC. So in fact, Connecticut hospitals, the Connecticut Department of Public Health recently released data talking about just enormous increases, like 500% increases in the last few years of people coming into hospitals with marijuana intoxication, and a 300% increase in people coming into hospitals in Connecticut with marijuana-induced psychosis. So you don't actually hear a lot about the things that I'm talking about, which is why we wanted to bring it up here today. In fact, these are some of the things you hear instead. People talking about it's natural because it's from a plant. Doesn't really look like the plant that much anymore. it's medical because Connecticut has medical marijuana, all these other things that you hear. So this is another just 1 minute video. So I probably
marijuana. It's the most widely used illegal drug in America, and it comes from the cannabis sativa plant. And like the tobacco plant, its smoke contains a mixture of gases and particles that are harmful to your lungs. It's time to separate fact from fiction. First, marijuana can be used as medicine. Fiction. Fact is, under federal law, marijuana is classified as an illegal drug with no approved medical use. Have you ever heard of anyone who smoked medicine? What the FDA has approved is Marinol, the active ingredient found in the marijuana plant. It's specifically prescribed to control nausea in cancer patients and to stimulate appetite in AIDS patients. Second, marijuana doesn't affect my performance at school and in athletics. Fiction. The fact is, marijuana does affect concentration and remembering facts, and that's risky, especially for a developing teenage brain. It can also affect movement and coordination, throwing off one's athletic performance. Third, driving under the influence of marijuana isn't dangerous. Fiction. Fact is, marijuana affects your ability to drive, judge distances, and react to signals and sounds on the road. Sadly, it's one of the most common illegal drugs found in drivers who die in car accidents. So, you have a choice when it comes to marijuana use. Do you want to follow fact or fiction?
Okay, that's the last video. So I'm not going to go over this slide because you're going to get this, but basically there are, I think what I'm trying to highlight here is a variety of beliefs that are out there about marijuana that that aren't necessarily correct and that lead people to believe it's maybe safer than it is. And so I think the real issue is, do kids know this stuff? Did their parents know it? And, if Connecticut legalizes it, are we going to be prepared to be making sure that our kids don't think that that means it's just safe for anybody to use? So just quickly, marijuana, as you heard, is illegal federally. It's becoming legal all the time in more states. In Connecticut, it is still, as of this moment, only legal for people who have a medical marijuana certificate, which is specifically not referred to as a prescription, because even though you have to get a certificate from a doctor, the doctor gives it to you. You don't go to a pharmacy, you go to a dispensary, and they let you pick out the product you want. It's not like there's no known dosage or delivery mechanism that's appropriate for a specific body size or weight or actual medical issue. It's just that you get to use marijuana. I know a lot of times people seem to think that there's this issue around people being in prison for having been in possession of a small amount of marijuana. That was decriminalized in Connecticut a long time ago. But it has recently become legal for recreational purposes or commercial purposes in basically a lot of states surrounding us. New York just passed it last week. So we will see what Connecticut decides to do. Because it has become legal for medical purposes at the state level in many states, and now increasingly for recreational purposes in many states, there's been this just general perception among adults and youth that it's just not that harmful, even though I hope you saw that there are clearly dangers to the teen brain. So this is just a chart to show that 12th grader, this is a chart showing 12th graders and their beliefs of whether it's dangerous to use marijuana occasionally, which is the top line, or regularly, which is the bottom line. So what this basically shows is that kids tend to think it's more dangerous to use regularly than occasionally, but my own screen share is blocking the years on the bottom. So I can't read the bottom of my graph, but at some point, I think this is like around the 90s. I think it's like around 1990, almost 80.
So
okay,
it correlates
thanks.
with the DARE program, it looks like to me.
Okay, that's what I was going to say, right? So it's like, I think when they introduced some serious drug education around 90, a bunch of people started to think, more people thought it was dangerous, but it's just been dropping. And overall in Connecticut, the youth surveys show that kids think marijuana is less dangerous than any other drug that they're asked about: alcohol, tobacco, prescription drug abuse. So just to kind of close out on the levels of usage, about 22%, so more than 1 in 5 teens were using marijuana pre-COVID. And the statistic was the same in the Connecticut and the US, but the LGBT population, or the LGB population in that study, was using at a much higher level. Hispanics and whites were using more than blacks, and boys were using slightly more than girls. So when we think about, who are the demographics we want to, educate the most. And this is to kind of look at the most recent trends. So this is the last 4 years of the Monitoring the Future survey. And what you can see here is the last number, the last bar on each chart is what happened last year. So during COVID, it looks like marijuana use in 12th graders decreased a tiny bit. That could just be access because everyone was home all the time. Also, there were far fewer people who took or completed the survey than in a normal year because of COVID. But I think what's relevant also is to look at the chart on the right, which is showing, on the left, this is just saying what percent of kids were using marijuana. And on the right, it's what percent were vaping marijuana. So for the last 2 years, more than half of the people who were using marijuana were vaping it, which again means they're using these high potency drugs. Oh, and there's my little arrow to say that. And then we already have looked at these focus groups with Emily presenting to us. But as you guys may remember, the focus groups that we just did in November and December really showed that kids were using marijuana differently from alcohol. And we did the focus groups right in Westport and elsewhere. And there seemed to be this distinction between you use alcohol for socializing and when you're bored, but you use marijuana to reduce your stress, and a sense that it was normal, and sort of really mixed messages, kids reporting really mixed messages at home from their parents about marijuana. So I just wanted to wrap up with that and take a couple questions, and then we'll send you the slideshow. So I guess my first question is, what was surprising or interesting to you here, and what's your takeaway?